so you can have this for later. We are going to be recording today's session.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everybody, and especially good morning, patients, Allison and Dr. Sims. It's Earth Day, so how fitting is it that we're having this conversation today, right? I think the programming team planned that one just right. So I'm Mark Snyder, and I am our program manager, and this is Talia Shores, our director of investor experience. So we're going to be leading this conversation today, and sustainability is a topic that shows up everywhere. We talk about it across government, business, and our daily lives. And at its core, it's really about planning for the future. As business leaders, that's what you're doing every day. Whether you're just starting your sustainability journey or refining an existing strategy, you've likely joined us because you're thinking about what the future looks like for your organization. So in a moment, you're going to hear from our exceptional panel with perspectives from the private sector, local government, and then even academia and research. But before we begin, I'd like to thank our partners who make events like this possible, our regional enhancement partners, Cirrus Aircraft, and our infrastructure ecosystem partners, Axe Fleet Maintenance, Cook Brother Homes, Fraley and Schilling, and SmartBank. So let's get started. This morning, Allison Kelly with Earthadelic, Patience Melnik with the city's Office of Sustainability, and Dr. Charles Sims with the Baker School has joined us. So I'm going to give each of you a moment to introduce yourself, starting with Allison, and then once you're all kind of done giving a brief just bio and good morning, we'll kick off.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Allison Kelly. I'm the marketing director for Earthadelic and also our sister company, Made Easy Concrete. I was kind of the one who spearheaded making sure our sustainability practices were, above board and everything. So it was a very interesting process to go through, and so I'm really excited to talk about it.
I'm Patience Melnik. I am the new Director of Sustainability for the City of Knoxville. We have a team of 4 in our office, and we've been around for a number of years supporting the sustainability efforts within the city and in the community. Just happy to be here, and thanks for your interest.
Hi, I'm Dr. Charles Sims. I'm the director of the Center for Energy, Transportation, and Environmental Policy here at the Baker School for Public Policy. I'm also the TVA Distinguished Professor of Energy and Environmental Policy at the Baker School, and also have a joint appointment with the Haslam College of Business and the Department of Economics. I'm an economist by training, so I do a lot of research on how businesses and government interact to sort of manage the environment and conserve natural resources. And that research has taken me everywhere from endangered and invasive species management to natural gas markets and coal markets and everything in between. So I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So as everyone just heard, our panelists are not busy at all in their day-to-day. So that's awesome. Well, since each of you have a very distinct and unique expertise, I would love to kick off our panel with just the question of what does sustainability mean in the work you specifically lead? And so whoever wants to start off with that, feel free. And then once we feel we've all kind of addressed it, we'll move on.
Well, I'm happy to start if you want. With us being a construction company, we really have to be aware of the kind of impact we're making on the community. So sustainability is a core tenet that we've always followed from whenever we were a small mowing company 20 years ago, starting out up until today, where we're building, large scale residential and commercial projects. So we take every bit of that to heart whenever we're building a project. So sustainability, we talk the talk, but we also walk the walk. So we have to make sure that we're making an impact positively in our community. So sustainability just means making sure we're not leaving behind anything that is going to harm the future generations in our community. So it's just something that's so important to us as a company.
So At the city, like I mentioned, we have a focus on kind of two buckets. And the first is sustainability within our operations. So that means always just looking for opportunities within our operations to make them more sustainable. So, for example, our fleet, we have a fleet of about 100 or 1,500 vehicles. That includes all the fire, police, inspectors, public service vehicles. And so, looking at our fleet, what can we do to make those vehicles more sustainable when it's time to replace a vehicle? Looking at EVs, replacing them with EVs or with alternative fuel vehicles. In the realm of our buildings, we have over 100 buildings in the city, owned by the city for city operations, and just ensuring that those envelopes are tight, that we're keeping up with our HVAC needs, and just making sure that the emissions that we are producing through our buildings and our transportation are kept as low as possible. And we kind of see ourselves within the city as sort of an in-house consultant. So we work with different departments to help them make their day-to-day operations more sustainable. Outside of the city, in the broader community, it's a little different because, of course, we don't tell people, what vehicle to buy, nor would we want to do that. So taking that example, we can support that infrastructure to make people who may have some range anxiety a little more comfortable with the idea of buying an EV, for example. So we put in, chargers around the city, public chargers that are free for folks to use. That's one type of way that we can support sustainability. Another way that, is less obvious, but all the work that we do in terms of putting in sidewalks and putting in bike lanes, just ways that they improve our quality of life. They help us be a healthier community, but they really do cut down on those transportation emissions too. And then I think a final way that we do that community work is with partners, so nonprofits, NGOs, other governmental entities like KCDC, CAC, KUB. And we typically will partner with those partners, maybe perhaps on larger grants, things that, individually we can't do, but when we kind of team up and partner together, we can, you know, do fantastic projects. An example of that would be with Trees Knoxville. They procured a large grant, and so the city is a partner with them, helping to establish the trees that they plant and then take care of them in the coming decades.
Great.
Yeah, and I think everything that's said here is pretty consistent with how I think about sustainability. I mean, when I tell my students in my undergraduate classes, sustainability, as you said, Mark, is really just being forward-looking and thinking a little bit about how the things that you're doing today are going to have an impact in the future, which sounds very, very simple. And I think usually where this concept gets a little more sticky is when you think about the future, how far out in the future. The future has lots of uncertainty associated with it. And so we spend a bunch of our time trying to think about how do you map out what that future world looks like so that you can think a little more critically about what is sustainable and what's not sustainable. We spend a bunch of time combining kind of physical science and natural science theories and models to help us think about what that looks like. And the example I use in class is, at one point we were really worried about the sustainability of our whale oil supply. We used whale oils to burn and light homes, and we were really worried about the sustainability of whale oil use. And technology came along and shifted us onto something else, and that wasn't a concern anymore. So technology changes, creates problems for sustainability, also creates opportunities for sustainability. And so we think a little bit about how that technology and sustainability interface come together. I like to joke in my class that, we could make this a lot more simple if we had Arnold Schwarzenegger as like a sustainability terminator who would come back from the future and tell us what we need or tell us what we're doing wrong. But without Arnold, we're trying to guess and predict, and that adds a bunch of uncertainty, which is usually where a lot of the sticking points around what's sustainable and what's not sustainable, where those arise.
That's awesome. And so I think each of you just touched on some great points that are going to help lead this conversation for the remainder of our time. But sticking on that kind of uncertainty piece, there's just a lot of uncertainty in general from time to time. It kind of ebbs and flows, at least in my experience here on the earth, right? And there's been some increased uncertainty around markets and things lately. And so as we were planning this program, we did talk about that in this group as a panel, and just kind of talked about how uncertainty affects business investment in general. And so I would love, Dr. Sims, I think you probably have some thoughts as an economist by trade, but Allison, you are a leader in a business here in Knoxville who's constantly investing, and then Patience, as you collaborate with different businesses through the community. I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on, do you think that uncertainty in times where there is increased uncertainty, does that have an even greater effect on sustainability investment specifically?
I don't know. Maybe Allison or Patience can go first with their specific examples, and then I'll get all professorial and theoretical after they give hard examples.
Perfect.
Well, that's a tough question. I mean, yeah, you do have to be more conservative with spending and upgrading your fleet and things like that when there's times of economic uncertainty. But we just make sure we're always making smart choices. And it's really a lot simpler to integrate into your day-to-day routine than people expect. And when you take out like the big expenses like buying EVs for the fleet and things like that, or investing in new technology, you can still make simple changes to make an impact as well. So that's a really tough question. So I'm curious to see what Patience and Charles will say about that.
I would say broadly speaking, I think sure things might slow in times of uncertainty, but I do think it's interesting that as a nation, our emissions peaked in 2007 and they've been declining ever since then, despite, a growth in the economy and a growth in the population. And I think that's just indicative of the fact that the underlying energy transition that we're going through, that's really what this is all about in terms of climate change and reducing our emissions, right? Is we're changing from this old way of fueling our industry and our lives. We're changing over to different forms of energy. And I think there's so much momentum there that, in the big picture, I think that that's kind of unstoppable at this point, is what experts are saying. So I think, sure, there's a little contraction when things are uncertain. Maybe people hold tight and don't take those extra steps or those big investments. But I think long term, I'm heartened by that trajectory. No matter what's happening in DC, that really is the trajectory, because these newer energy sources make financial sense. So.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time studying policy uncertainty. So this notion that environmental policy changes from time to time, or we don't know what it's going to look like. Policies may be in place today and they may go away in the future. All of that uncertainty, as Allison and Patience were alluding to, sort of creates headwinds for business investments. And so we've spent some time researching that and trying to quantify how much that reduces things. And so we've sort of quantified what everybody thinks is that this environmental policy uncertainty has gone up over time, which just means that businesses have less certainty that the policies that are in place today are going to be around in the future. Makes it hard to bank on a subsidy or a tax break or something like that because you're not sure if it's going to be around. And most of the investments that we were talking about for sustainability, these are 20-year investments that are going into play. So, having a tax break for a short amount of time and then having it go away is a big deal. But we've gone through and tried to quantify that. We've created an index of policy uncertainty that we actually built by doing newspaper scans. And so kind of using newspaper articles to gauge people's sentiment about how uncertain the policy environment is. And we showed that, sure, it does actually create headwinds. It actually creates more headwinds than a lot of other policy uncertainty. So when we looked at it at the time, and this has changed of late, but when we looked at it at the time, environmental policy uncertainty created more headwinds than financial market uncertainty, trade policy uncertainty, macroeconomic uncertainty. It was one of the more important uncertainties you could have. And to just give you an example, the uncertainty that we found tends to run up prior to a presidential election. That's when a lot of people are making pronouncements about what they're going to do over the next 4 years. And so in the lead up to the 2008 presidential election, we found that policy uncertainty decreased business investment by about 25% for companies that were going to be influenced by the environmental policies that were being discussed at that time. So this is a unique period of policy uncertainty that we're in right now, and it's spread from environmental policy to trade policy. But I think all those things make it just a little bit harder maybe to make some of the investments that you would want to make in terms of sustainability. It's not that they're necessarily singling out investments in sustainability, they're just putting headwinds against overall investment that businesses are trying to make.
That was greatly put from everybody. And patience, it was super, I like your word heartening. It's heartening to hear you remind us that, we hit our emissions peak a while back. And so it is good to know that, even with headwinds, as Charles discussed, that we are making progress as a society, and that is heartening. So I like that word. That's my word for the day and maybe the week. I kind of wear them out, But I want to go back to a couple things that you each have said. So Allison, when you were talking originally, you said something really important to Earthadelic is that you talk the talk and walk the walk. And then you were also just talking about, obviously in times of economic uncertainty, it's harder to make large investments maybe, but there's still investments nonetheless. Something you all have done, Earthadelic is green at its core, right? Because it's an outdoor-based company, things like that. But you all earned the WasteWise certification from Keep Knoxville Beautiful. And I think that is something that's super valuable in this community specifically. And I think our business community that's here today would love to hear about that. So can you share a little bit about that certification, what it looked like attaining it at Earthadelic? And then also, what does it mean to you all, and not just the company, but the individuals in the company too?
Yeah, absolutely. That was actually a great sense of pride for our company to get that. I think we were the first gold certified WasteWise company in Knoxville. So we're really proud of that. And they Keep Knoxville Beautiful did a great job of putting together a checklist of things that were probably very vital for a company to make sure that they're on top of, to make sure that they're not making a huge impact. So we did a waste audit. We checked ourselves to see, what were we producing and where could we make cuts and where could we make changes. And we started really small, just in our offices. Every workstation had a recycling station. We stopped buying paper coffee cups. Everyone had to bring in their reusable cups. And we got a composter. We switched our paper to be recycled paper. So it was just a lot of small steps that you could take as a company in our office to make a difference. And then kind of speaking on a broader thing, this is kind of beyond the WasteWise thing, but we started investing in an electric fleet. And so every time we get a new truck for our superintendents who might not need to haul a ton of stuff around, to get a new electric truck. And so we're starting to convert our fleet over. And then we've also, invested in we started a concrete company. And when people think concrete, that's not the most greenest thing in their brain, but we invested in volumetric concrete trucks. So if you are building something and you're wanting it to be more eco-friendly, that's a great way to go because you're using less water, there's less waste, because it creates concrete on site. So you're not leaving behind a footprint of a bunch of concrete waste or overuse or anything like that. So that was very important to us. And then also taking part in community events. We're highly involved with Keep Knoxville Beautiful and Trees Knoxville. We do adopt a road cleanups every quarter with our team. We've adopted the road right outside our office, and we just all grab our trash bags and grabbers and head out for a few hours every couple months and make sure, we're doing our part with boots on the ground. So there's so many different ways that we have incorporated this in just our daily routine. So the WasteWise thing was a great catalyst for us to just make sure that we are keeping ourselves in check and we're actually doing what we need to do to make an impact in the community. So I'm really proud of everything that our company does, and everyone holds each other accountable. It's really hilarious. I'll get emails of somebody, like a picture of a trash can, and somebody has thrown trash in the recycling or recycling in the trash, and so then we have to have a heart to heart. All right, guys, we're sending an email out. This is we got to do better. So even our cleaning company that comes in once a week, they'll send me pictures of saying, oh, there was a paper cup in somebody's trash. You need to probably say something. So we all hold each other accountable, and so it's a great. It's actually a really good little competition we have in our company. It's a healthy competition. And so I'm really proud of our business and how we've evolved to make sure this is part of our daily routine.
I love that. And just something that I just really heard throughout all that is culture, right? Like culture is so important in companies today. It's been talked about so largely by HR experts and so many other folks too. And so you guys have obviously made this a part of your culture for your team. And I'm going rogue just a little bit, Allison, if you don't mind, but you talked about the volumetric concrete trucks. So extend that culture now to your customer. How do you all ever get a reaction from customers when you explain the process of that specific type of concrete and your offering? Like, do you ever get reactions as far as like, whoa, that's really awesome. Like, so I get to do this and it's actually not going to be awful for the environment and things like that.
Yeah, 100%. So these types of trucks have been around for a long time. They're just not widely used in the United States. I mean, there's maybe more in like Texas and places like that. There's a cluster of them, but they're really more widely used in Europe, especially, because they have much stricter regulations on a lot of green technologies and how you're building things and all of that kind of thing. And then if you're also trying to get LEED certified, that's also something that can help you get points towards that certification, because you're using a truck that is not leaving behind as much of a carbon footprint. So these trucks are really interesting. Like all of it pours just as fast as a barrel truck, and it carries just as much as a barrel truck. It carries 10 yards of concrete on it. And so when we show up to these job sites and these contractors see what kind of looks like a dump truck, to be honest, they can be a little bit confused, but it's all a big education piece. So we do lunch and learns pretty often with contractors and things to explain, this piece has the Portland cement in it. This piece has the sand, this piece has the aggregate, this piece has water. And then our guys put a calculation into the computer. And if somebody wants a 4,000 PSI concrete with additive and fiber, we can do that on the spot. And then if they decide that they don't want or don't need 10 yards of concrete, they only need 8 yards of concrete, that's no big deal. We're not going to throw out 2 yards of concrete because we didn't show up to the site with 10 yards of concrete. We only produce what they need there. So the washout, the leave behind is much smaller. And then you're only using the amount of water that you need to make that amount of concrete as well. So it's always a really cool reaction to see that light bulb go off in contractors' heads. They're like, oh, I only have to pay for what I used, and there's no concrete washout huge area that I need to prepare for on my job site. Like there's so many things that make so much sense to use this type of concrete method. And it's just so much friendlier to the environment. That's just a bonus on top of everything else.
That's huge. I mean, cost savings as a business owner, we all know is important. And just, even as a consumer too, we love cost savings, right? So that's awesome that it's great for the environment, better for the environment, and also great for the customer. So that's cool. Patience, switching to you for a second, because it's something you said when we asked our initial question of, what does sustainability mean in the work you lead, is you talked a little bit about grants. And I know that when we were planning for this panel, you specifically talked a little bit about the EPA grant and its 2-year planning process, that type thing. Can you talk a little bit more about that for our audience? Maybe they aren't quite sure what that is. And then also, can you share, as you share what it is, how it shapes our community specific to Knoxville's sustainability priorities?
Sure. Yeah, so we are currently carrying out a project under an EPA grant, and the grant is called the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant. And our project is called the Breathe Initiative. And essentially, what that does is it brings together all the regional partners. We're working with Maryville, with Alcoa, with Oak Ridge. We're working with the TPO here, the Knox Planning Transportation Planning Organization, and just a host of other partners from the community. We've workshopped with over 100 participants so far, and this process is ongoing. And essentially, what we're trying to do is create a comprehensive climate action plan for the region. And essentially, so far in the process, we have 19 initiatives, and we're really, digging in there. We're working with a consultant too, so they're, crunching all the numbers and assisting us. And we're really coming up with kind of a roadmap of how to reduce our emissions in the coming decades through these initiatives. And, going so far as how are we going to fund these things, the details of who the actors are, who are going to carry them out. So that's a really exciting process. We're actually meeting today, but I would encourage anybody who's interested to join in. We're going to have meetings over the next few months, and none of them are mandatory. You can sign up and attend what you can attend. But we would love even more participation, especially from businesses and industry. They're a really important piece of all of this. So if anyone is interested, you can visit it's knoxbreathe.org, and sign up for more information.
That is awesome. And so two quick things for our attendees is one, we do have a Q&A. So as you guys think of questions, feel free to drop them in there. As a panel, we have a few more things to go through, and then we'll open it up to those. But then secondly, we will follow up after today. And so with an email to all of our attendees. And so patients, we'll make sure we include that website in there because I think that's awesome. And one thing as a chamber, some of our work that we're really centered around is kind of our working age demographic, which is that 25 to kind of 50 age range. And I think something they are excited about is emissions reducing. And then also something you talked about is like more walkability. That's some things you guys are involved in. And so I think it's great that this Breathe initiative is trying to look at all the things you can do to kind of accomplish that in Knoxville. So that's exciting for many folks, business community too. So awesome. Thank y'all. So we've talked a little bit about different collaboration in the community on this. I know patients, you mentioned KUB, and then Dr. Sims, you talked about TVA a little bit already. So you actually you had some leadership in the Valley Pathways study. I would love for you to talk a little bit about that for our audience, what it is, the impact of it, and kind of what that means for the future. Because as we said, this is all about future planning. So yeah.
Yeah, so the Valley Pathways study was an effort to determine what was the carbon footprint of the Tennessee Valley economy, and were we likely to reach net zero by 2050? And so a lot of the emphasis over the years has been on TVA decarbonizing, and they've made a lot of strides to reduce carbon emissions in the electric utility sector. But as I tell my students, if you want to achieve any pollution target, you don't take one industry and drive them down to pollution equals zero and then go look to the next industry, right? You sort of draw all of them down kind of equally. And so this was sort of an effort to go through and say, okay, TVA's made lots of efforts. What other industries out there are big emitters, and what are they trying to do on their own to reduce their emissions? So we spent about 2 years putting together stakeholder working groups with various business leaders from different industries, from different government agencies, to try to do some carbon accounting. And so carbon accounting is essentially what it sounds like. We're going through and trying to determine how many carbon emissions are coming out of different industries and different sectors of the Tennessee Valley economy. We then took a few decarbonization pathways that are very similar to the ones that TVA uses when they're doing long-range forecasting and long-range planning for their investments. And we said, if any of these things start to play out, are we going to be able to reach net zero? And so one of them might have been a heavy emphasis on electrification, where a lot of fossil fuel burning switches over to electrification. Another scenario was a large economic growth in the valley. But we ran various scenarios to determine under which scenarios would we reach net zero. And we found that in a lot of them, we're on the right path in a lot of these industries to reach net zero. And so one of the recommendations I'd have for policymakers is to try to not outthink your business partners. The business partners have lots of information about how their particular business works that policymakers don't have. And so I always try to recommend to policymakers that if you're trying to put together a policy to encourage more sustainable practices, try to think about creating the right incentives and then getting the business community to help you think about how to do that rather than to put restrictive kind of, you have to do this or you have to do that. Those are going to be usually much more, well, for one, they're not very popular. And for two, they're usually the more costly way of achieving whatever environmental target you're after. Usually we really like policies that sort of incentivize companies to think outside the box, and they can usually come up with pretty innovative ways to reduce their emissions if you just create the right incentives. So that was one thing we learned from the Valley Pathways study that I keep coming back to again and again when we try to recommend ways to achieve sustainability for policy. The other thing that I would recommend, coming from some of that research that we did on policy uncertainty, was to try to be as clear and specific as you can about your policy goals. And so reminding policymakers that constant back and forth trying to get the policy exactly right is not good, right? We tend to think that these constant adjustments are moving us towards some sweet spot policy, and I think everyone who's in business recognizes that, the policy doesn't have to be right; it just needs to be consistent, right? And so stop changing things so often to update is probably another recommendation. But another thing that I have to say, just because I'm at the Baker School, is we found that the effect, that negative effect of policy uncertainty virtually vanishes when you have bipartisan policy. And our hunch on this is that when you have bipartisan policy, businesses are more confident that that policy is going to stick around and have lasting effects. And so here, I sit in the Baker School for Public Policy, and Senator Baker was always very fond of saying the other guy might be right, which was his way of saying that there's benefits to thinking about bipartisan policies. And so we've actually gone through and found that that's true. I mean, the more bipartisan they are, the less that uncertainty seems to deter business investment. So those would be my two recommendations for trying to craft policy that's going to be more welcoming to sustainable practices.
That's great. And one thing that really stood out in that is you talked a lot about business. Don't outwork necessarily your business partners as a policymaker. And so I want to hear both from Allison and Patience. Allison, from you specifically, again, you guys are a business. What does that mean to you, I guess, as far as you guys have obviously with the WasteWise certification and just a lot of intentionality in Earthadelic, came up with different ways that could easily be implemented, and then you've figured out a way to also show value in the business, right? To that. So what does that mean for you, I guess, as far as how do you see the relationship between businesses and policymakers on sustainability policy?
That's a tough question for me to personally answer, but working so closely with the business owners, I know that the tax credits and all that never really was, I mean, it's nice, but it was never the incentive for us to buy the EVs or switch over. That was just always our core tenet, as I've said before, to give back to the community. So it's not really driven by policy per se. It's really more personally driven. I mean, when we do our company happy hours every month, and we get offended if there's not a recycling can. So a lot of us will just, if we can, we'll take them and recycle them ourselves. So it's really just, it was more of a personal decision, and if it had great benefit for the company, that was just a bonus. So it wasn't a driver for us, but I know how it can be for a lot of companies because there are a lot of great benefits. So
I think that's impactful to hear too, though, that it was really a choice from just kind of, again, back to that culture piece for Earthadelic, and then it just ended up also being a benefit. Patience, something I guess that I wanted to hear from you is how do you think, like, you work with the city, you lead this kind of city's efforts in sustainability. How do you see businesses and government working best together on sustainability efforts?
I mean, I think in our community, it's more collaborative than, the city trying to dictate what businesses are doing. I think what Dr. Sims said is, generally true, that businesses, they know their business. And that's not something that the city really, tries to regulate. We try to be a good partner with businesses. Um, so I don't think I know in other cities and other states, they might have more of those policies, that are coming from the cities and dictating what businesses are doing in their community. But we have, I think, less of that here.
Awesome. One more question, and then we'll kind of open it up to the Q&A. I think there may be a question in there, and if not, audience, feel free to start throwing in some thoughts that may have come up during this discussion. But I have to ask, because again, a lot of the work we lead in the chamber, we look at a lot of economic trends and things like that. So Dr. Sims, as an economics professional, what do you think are some of the factors specific to economics that a community should look at when prioritizing shift to renewable energy or just more sustainable practices in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first and foremost is probably just the overall market trends, right? I mean, just sort of paying attention to what's going on outside the community. Um, I mean, it's certainly going to be the case that doing things in a period of inflation is much harder to do than in a period where you don't have inflation, right? But I think one thing that we probably don't think about nearly as much is the degree to which businesses are attracting talent because of some of the natural amenities that a city has. This is something that we get asked about a lot, is the degree to which parks and greenways and some of the natural amenities that a region has, how do they attract businesses? Do they attract businesses? And it's a hard thing to quantify. But when we talk informally to people, we know that businesses are very, very interested in locating in places where they have those amenities. And they really want to do business in those areas. And it makes it easier to attract talent to those areas. So I think that's one thing when we're thinking about sort of what can we do at a very local level at kind of the city of Knoxville and Knox County, is kind of reminding ourselves that these natural amenities that we all enjoy, they do have a business benefit, right? They're not just restricting development or something. They're actually attracting companies that want to be in these areas for the trails and the parks and adjacency to the national park and things like this. Those are usually places where these companies would want to site headquarters and bring in talent to live. And so I think it's important to remember that when we're thinking about kind of planning for the city and what kind of those natural amenities that we want to invest in as a community.
That's awesome. And I love that you just talked about, how these green spaces and such do attract businesses and talent, because I actually moved here about 4 years ago from Nashville, which I'm sure anyone that's listening knows Nashville's quite different than Knoxville. And I always lived in the city core too, so very urban. And not necessarily were those things what attracted me here. It was definitely job related, but those are definitely the things that my family really enjoy here, and that why Knoxville is home to us. And so I think that is so true, and I love that you touched on that. So that's great. So one of our attendees has a question, Patience, for you. They would like to know, over the next 5 years, what examples of sustainability leadership can the general public expect to see the city implement?
That's a great question. And we're kind of in a time of flux. I'm new in the position, and we're kind of working through that grant that I mentioned and other grants. I hope, I can't, give any details, but we're working on some solar initiatives. And so that is kind of something that I can't promise, but I think that we'll see some of that. in the near future. We're just going to increase, the number of EV charging stations that we have. We have some plans for that. And we'll just kind of continue down those paths.
That's awesome. And that was a great response. And that same person also is curious, how as the chamber will we support these things too? It's things like what we're doing today. This was a program that was really important to us. I shared that with these panelists as we were kind of planning beforehand. And we'll continue to do things like this. I heard someone talk about walkability already today, patients. And so those are things that we care about, obviously. And again, going back to what Dr. Sims literally just said, as far as these things also do attract business and talent. So therefore, it's obviously in our lanes too. So I think our role is really just being an advocate to promote the availability of these wonderful folks you see on the screen that are not me, and that they're here as a resource to talk to leverage those things. So that's where we see ourselves. For anyone, what local companies or sectors do you maybe see as leaders in the sustainability space? And are there any specific, this is kind of a two-piece, are there specific workforce needs or skill gaps that you see specifically here in Knoxville from a sustainability perspective?
I can go first. I don't know. This is just one that pops to mind that came up when we were doing the Valley Pathways study. But one of the things that came up was the degree to which the ag sector in our region is actually relatively clean. When we had the folks that were coming in and doing a lot of the carbon accounting work for us, they were shocked at how much no-till agriculture we do in not just in East Tennessee, but overall through Tennessee. And this has been a concerted effort by the Institute of Agriculture at the University of Tennessee to try to promote those practices because they have a lot of carbon benefits, a lot of benefits in general, but a lot of carbon sequestration benefits. But they're not widely practiced throughout the United States. And so when they came into our region, they were like, oh, well, one of the things we can do to reduce carbon emissions out of the ag sector is to do more no-till ag. And all the farmers were like, yep, we're already doing it. We've been doing it for 20 years. So I think that's one area that came to mind that was highlighted by having kind of folks from outside the region come into the region and kind of critically evaluate our economy.
That's awesome. Perfect. Well, one more question for everybody. And then also before we hop off today, I want to make sure that I give our wonderful panelists a chance to add any further thoughts or remarks. But just if there was one thing, and all of you can answer this, one of you, whomever, but if there's just one thing that our audience as an individual could do today to move the needle on sustainability in their organization and their personal life, what's that suggestion? Allison, you talked a lot about just recycling. That feels like something everyone could do, but I would love to hear your thoughts as just one thing that could be really impactful from our audience today.
I will say, I think it's just like making conscious choices. If you're going to, it can be really simple. You don't have to overcomplicate it. Like I said, the recycling piece, but even just, your reusable mugs and things like that, you can start small. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated. I think a lot of people think that you've got to make huge changes to really make an impact, but you really don't have to do anything crazy. So.
I wanted to give a plug for KUB as a resource for businesses. They're kind of right under our nose, but I don't think folks necessarily know or take advantage of their programs. They have a great webpage, Energy Resources for Business and Industry, with a host of different resources and options and programs to help businesses and industry be more sustainable. So that would be my first stop to kind of see what's on there. There are rebates that are available and just a lot of support to help with that transition.
I will say, and using companies that are more prone to greener practices, if you're wanting to build something, maybe use a company that is going to be a little more aware what they're doing, as a company. So, or even if you're purchasing something, be aware of maybe buying from the smaller business rather than the bigger business. So that would just to kind of add to that piece.
Yeah, I think the only thing I could add to that is taking a critical look at your business practices and finding those places where you get the win-win solutions, right? Allison was talking about this earlier, but where are the cases where it's more sustainability, it's more sustainable and it's going to save you some costs. As economists, we like to think that all the cost savings have already been squeezed out by the market, right? But we know that there's lots of cost savings that just sort of slip through the cracks and businesses just can't pay attention and catch all of them, right? So I think coming through and thinking about this more from is there a cost saving measure to this? You'll be maybe more likely to find some sustainability measures that will stick because you recognize that they are those win-win solutions. And I'm fairly certain, Allison gave some good examples, but I'm fairly certain that most of the people in the audience here will find some of those in their day-to-day business practices if they look hard enough. And they're usually just saving you a little bit of money, and that's why they've slipped through the cracks. They're not gonna, they're not groundbreaking. It's not gonna completely shake up your accountant or anything, but there's still small changes that would both save you money and are sustainable. And I think those are the win-win solutions that have a lasting impact.
That's awesome. And I think, something I heard from all of you just then in a different way is exactly what Allison said of just don't overcomplicate it, which I do have to just share. I'm a big car guy, and so I've been begging my wife to allow me to purchase an EV, but you just said don't overcomplicate it. So I guess I can't get my new car, Allison, yet. But that's awesome. So I just want to say thank you to each of you. I know, again, we talked about this at the beginning. You're all obviously very busy and leading super important work in our communities. So thanks for your time today and sharing these insights with our business community. It's super impactful. So thank y'all. Awesome. And before we hop off, I just want to thank our audience too for spending their morning with us. And of course, our generous partners, Cirrus Aircraft, Axe Fleet Maintenance, Cook Brother Homes, Fraley & Schilling, and Smart Bank. And then just one more thing, as we kind of get closer to the warmer months, everyone's in and out of town, so programming slows down just a little bit. But one thing that is on the calendar from the chamber side of things is our annual shrimp boil, Pillin', Eatin', and Politickin'. It is on my Alabama really came out just then. It will take place on Thursday, June 12th at the Lighthouse. And those tickets are on sale now. You can get them through our website. So feel free to do that. And I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Yes, thank y'all.
Thank you.